She had been laughing 5 minutes before. Then, the Husky stopped playing, and something in the room changed that no one in it could name. Britta Holt had raised sled dogs. She had grown up in northern Minnesota with working Huskies who communicated through a vocabulary of sounds that most people who hadn't lived with the breed would call alarming. Wailing, moaning, sustained vocalizations that traveled through walls and across fields. She was not a person who startled easily. She was not a person who misread her dog. So when Kodiak, her 4-year-old Husky, positioned himself outside the nursery door at 10:47 p.m. on a Thursday in February and began a low, sustained whine that she had not heard him produce in 4 years of living with him, she was already up. Her daughter Fenna was 7 months old. She had been healthy. She had a mild cold, a pediatrician-confirmed mild cold, 2 days prior, runny nose, no fever, go home and monitor, come back if anything changes. Britta had been a respiratory therapist for 6 years before Fenna arrived. She knew what upper respiratory symptoms in infants looked like when they were becoming something else. She had assessed Fenna at 8 p.m. before putting her down. Clear breath sounds, nasal congestion managed with saline drops, oxygen saturation, 98 on the home pulse ox. She was fine. Kodiak was not fine. He was pressed flat against the nursery door with a kind of stillness that was the opposite of the sounds he was making. Body rigid, ears forward, nose moving in rapid, shallow pulses against the gap at the bottom of the door. Britta's husband, Eric, came to stand beside her in the hall. He said, "It's probably just he doesn't want to be away from her. He usually sleeps outside her door anyway." That was true. He did. Britta said, "This isn't the same sound." She opened the door. Kodiak was in before her. He moved to the crib and stood on his rear legs, both paws on the rail, and pressed his nose toward Fenna's face. Fenna was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't sound peaceful when you know how a baby breathes. Britta turned on the lamp. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you are in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Fenna's nasal passages had closed almost completely during sleep. Her chest was working. Visible effort, ribs showing slightly with each inhale. Her lips were a color that was technically still within normal range, but was moving. Oxygen saturation was 93. Britta had the pulse ox in her hand, without remembering picking it up. At 93 you call someone. At 93 for a 7-month-old at 11 p.m., with a known upper respiratory infection and an airway that was visibly compromised. You don't wait to see if it improves. She called 911. She stayed on the line with Fenna against her chest, one hand pressing the pulse ox against the baby's foot, calling out numbers to the dispatcher. Kodiak sat at her feet and did not move. He had stopped making sounds. He pressed his nose against Fenna's ankle, slow and steady, and held it there. Britta did not register this until later, looking at the footage from the nursery camera. The way he stayed, the way he positioned himself not at the door but between Britta and the window, as if sealing the room around the baby. She thought he was anxious. She said that in the 911 call, "My dog is anxious." Has your dog ever responded to something before you understood what it was responding to? Tell us in the comments. These stories need to be heard. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. Fenna's oxygen had dropped to 89 by the time they came through the door. The lead paramedic, Stevie Gauthier, 6 years in pediatric emergency response, told them what Britta already understood but had not let herself say out loud. Fenna was in respiratory distress. The mucus accumulation during sleep had progressed to near-complete nasal obstruction. At 7 months, infants cannot breathe exclusively through the mouth during sleep. The work of breathing against that obstruction was depleting her oxygen faster than her body could compensate. She needed intervention. At the hospital, the respiratory specialist said the word nobody wants to hear in a sentence about an infant. If they had waited until morning, if she hadn't been checked, if the numbers had continued dropping unobserved for another 40 minutes. She said the word and left the sentence open the way doctors do when the answer is something the family doesn't need. spoken. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Britta sat in the family room of the pediatric unit at 3 a.m. with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, and went through everything she knew about Husky vocalizations. He had a sound for hunger, a sound for wanting to go outside, a sound for seeing another dog through the window, a sound for wanting her attention. None of those sounds had a frequency component that matched what she heard at 10:47. In 6 years of respiratory therapy, she had never thought about whether animals could detect oxygen desaturation in another individual through scent alone. She looked it up that night on her phone. The research is not complete. The theory exists. Carbon dioxide concentration in exhalation increases as oxygen saturation drops. Dogs register CO2 differentials in parts per million. She cannot prove Kodiak read Fenna's breath. She knows what sound he made. She knows when he made it. She knows what they found when they opened the door. Fenna came home the following afternoon, airway clear, saturation steady, wrapped in a yellow blanket that smelled like the hospital. Kodiak met them at the door and walked beside the carrier to the nursery and lay down next to the crib on the side closer to the window. He has slept there every night since,